Life Stories presents a journey of love, sacrifice, and self-discovery. Meet Emily, a young woman who devoted her life to supporting the man she loved, James, through every struggle and setback. But as his success grew, so did his disregard for the woman who had always been by his side. In this story of betrayal and resilience, Emily learns valuable lessons about self-worth, strength, and independence. Join us as we unfold this powerful tale of transformation. Subscribe to the channel to start the story today. Emily was just 25 years old, but her life was already filled with responsibilities and struggles. Every morning, before the first light of dawn, she was already awake, preparing herself for another long day as a seamstress. She worked tirelessly in the bustling city of Brooklyn, where she had set up a small shop in a quiet corner of the town. The hum of her sewing machine was a constant sound in her life. And it was in this modest shop that she poured all her energy, stitching clothes for her customers, trying to make ends meet. Despite the hardships, Emily was a woman of grace. Her heart was kind, and she believed in the goodness of people, especially in the man she loved, James. James was different from the other men she knew. He was ambitious, full of dreams, but unfortunately, he lacked the financial stability to turn those dreams into reality. He had tried his hand at various business ventures, from selling electronics to opening a small barbershop, but none of them succeeded. Yet, Emily believed in him, always hopeful that one day, he would make it. She was his biggest cheerleader. And despite her own struggles, she stood by him with unwavering support. "I promise this time, my business will work," James would say, his voice filled with sincerity. They would sit together in the small one-room apartment she rented, and Emily would gaze at him with all the love she could muster. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that everything would work out for them. But it wasn't easy. Emily worked late into the night, sewing dresses for her customers to pay for their meals. To support James's dreams, she gave him money for food, helped him pay his bills, and even took out loans to fund his business ventures. Her friends warned her, and they were concerned for her. They asked her why she kept sacrificing so much for a man who hadn't proven himself yet. "Emily, you're doing too much for him. What if he leaves you one day?" her best friend, Kate, asked one evening, her voice filled with concern. But Emily refused to listen. "James isn't like that. He loves me, and I love him too," she replied, her eyes shining with an unwavering belief in him. Days turned into weeks, and then months. James's business never seemed to take off. It was always one problem after another, and yet, he came to her again and again with requests for more money. One evening, he came to her with a desperate look in his eyes. "Emily, I need $50,000 to restock my shop. The customers are complaining that I don't have enough goods," James said, his voice filled with urgency. Emily hesitated for a moment. That was the money she had saved up to rent a better shop for herself. But seeing the worry in James's eyes, she handed him the cash. "God bless you for me, my love," he said, hugging her tightly. Emily smiled, but deep down, she felt a pang of doubt. It wasn't just the money, it was the constant sacrifices, the constant giving without receiving much in return. But Emily didn't allow herself to think about it. She loved him, and she believed that one day, things would get better for them. But as time passed, Emily began to feel a growing unease. She spent more and more time in her small shop, stitching clothes for customers who seemed to be fewer and fewer. One evening, as she worked into the late hours of the night, Kate visited her. She sat on a plastic chair in the corner of the shop, watching Emily as she worked, her expression troubled. "Emily, how long will you continue like this?" Kate asked, her voice tinged with frustration. Emily sighed, knowing where the conversation was headed. She didn't want to hear it, but deep down, she knew it was something she had to face. "I love James. I believe in him. One day, things will get better," Emily replied, her voice soft but firm. But Kate wasn't convinced. "It's not love, Emily. It's loyalty. You've been paying his bills, funding his business, buying him clothes, Does that sound right? You're the one carrying the weight of this relationship. And yet he's getting away with everything. I can't imagine being with a man like that. Her words stung. Emily loved James. But Kate's warnings began to echo in her mind. What if Kate was right? What if James was just using her? Clinging to her while he had nothing. And then leaving her when he had everything? Could she trust him? Was she making a mistake by believing in him so much? But despite the doubt, Emily pushed those thoughts aside. She wanted to believe in James. She believed that one day, when he succeeded, they would build a better life together. That hope kept her going. Even as she poured her soul into her work. Even as her doubts began to creep in. And so, she continued to give, to believe, and to hope that one day, the sacrifices she had made would pay off. As the weeks passed, Emily noticed a subtle shift in James. He still came to her when he needed money. But something was different. He wasn't the same man she had fallen in love with. His eyes no longer sparkled with the same excitement. And the warmth he once showed her began to fade. Emily tried to ignore it, convincing herself that it was just the stress of his business. But deep down, she knew something wasn't right. One evening, as she sat outside her shop, James came to her with a worried look on his face. Emily, I hate to ask, but I need your help again, he said, his voice strained. Emily paused, the weight of his request heavy in her heart. What is it this time, James? She asked softly, trying to mask the growing frustration she felt. I need $100,000 to add more stock to my shop, he said, his eyes pleading. This is the last time I'll ask. I swear. Emily stared at him for a long moment, her mind racing. The money she had saved was almost gone, and she had been planning to buy a new sewing machine to expand her own business. But there he was, asking for more. Her heart wavered, torn between the love she felt for him and the reality of her own situation. She looked into his eyes, searching for the man she once knew. James, tell me the truth. When you finally make it, will you ever forget me? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. James's expression softened, and he grabbed her hands. Forget you? God forbid. Emily, you're my queen. If not for you, I wouldn't be where I am today. I'll never forget you. In fact, when I make it, I'll repay you for everything. I'll make you the happiest woman alive. His words melted her heart. And for a brief moment, she believed him. She wanted to trust that all her sacrifices would be worth it in the end. But something in the back of her mind whispered doubts, though she quickly pushed them away. I'll give you the money, James, she said, forcing a smile. I believe in you. James hugged her tightly, his voice full of gratitude. Thank you, Emily. I promise things will change soon. But as days turned into weeks, Emily began to notice the changes in James becoming more pronounced. He still came to her for money. But now, he seemed distracted. He was always checking his phone, making secret calls, and he was often distant when they spent time together. Emily tried to ignore it, but the nagging feeling in her gut grew stronger with each passing day. Then, one evening, her best friend Kate came to visit her at the shop, a look of disbelief on her face. Emily, you won't believe what I just saw, Kate said, her voice tinged with anger. What is it? Emily asked, concerned by Kate's tone. I saw James at Mama's restaurant, eating like a king, Kate said, her eyes wide with shock. And guess what? He was with another woman. They were laughing, ordering drinks, and acting like lovers. Emily's heart stopped. She couldn't believe it. That's not possible, she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. Kate's voice grew sharper. Open your eyes, Emily. You're here, suffering, working yourself to the bone while he's out there enjoying your hard-earned money with another woman. Don't let him use you like this. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. But she refused to believe it. James would never do that, she muttered, her voice breaking. But deep down, doubt had already begun to creep in. Later that night, Emily confronted James. Where were you this afternoon? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. James looked surprised. I was at my shop, working, he replied, his voice defensive. Emily's stomach twisted. She didn't believe him. Are you sure? Because someone told me they saw you at Mama's with another woman. James's face darkened, and he sighed. So, you don't trust me anymore? After everything we've been through, you're listening to gossip instead of believing in me? Emily felt a pang of guilt. What if she was wrong? What if James was telling the truth? But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I'm sorry, she mumbled, her voice barely audible. James sighed and pulled her into a hug. I love you, Emily. You're my queen. Don't let anyone fill your head with nonsense. But even as he said the words, Emily felt a cold emptiness inside. The man she had believed in, the man she had sacrificed so much for, was slipping away, and she didn't know how to stop it. It wasn't long before Emily began to notice the stark change in James. At first, she tried to convince herself that it was just a phase. Maybe the pressure of his success was overwhelming him. But as time passed, his behavior became increasingly distant and cold. The man who had once been so grateful, who had promised her the world, was now barely showing any affection. The calls became shorter, the visits fewer, and the man who had been her partner seemed to be slipping away. Lost in a world she no longer understood. One evening, after several weeks of being ignored and treated like an afterthought, Emily decided to pay him a visit. She had a feeling deep down that things were changing, but she couldn't put her finger on it. She found herself standing outside the apartment where he had moved after his business took off. The building was grand, the luxury evident in every polished corner. Emily stood at the entrance, feeling out of place. This was no longer the man she had stood by, the man who had once been so humble. When the door opened, James greeted her, but there was no warmth in his smile, no joy in his eyes. Hey, Emily, he said casually, stepping aside to let her in. The change was unmistakable. He was dressed in designer clothes now, and his once modest apartment was now adorned with expensive furniture and lavish decor. Emily couldn't help but feel a pang in her chest. It wasn't just his success that bothered her, it was the way he had changed. The way he now looked at her as if she no longer belonged in his world. They sat down in the plush living room, and James made small talk. His attention split between Emily and his phone. He was always checking messages, laughing at something on the screen, distracted by the people who were now a part of his life, people she had never known, people he hadn't had time for when he was struggling. James, what's going on? We used to be so close. You used to care, Emily said softly, trying to find the right words. He chuckled, but it wasn't the warm, affectionate laugh she remembered. It was different now, cold, distant. It's just the business world, Emily. Things change. I need to move with the right people now. Her heart sank as she listened to him speak. The man she had supported through his darkest times, the man she had believed in when no one else did, was now speaking to her like a stranger. But even as the pain swelled in her chest, Emily tried to hold on to the hope that things would get better. Weeks later, after yet another string of cold responses, she began to see James in a different light. His arrogance grew, and so did his disregard for the woman who had been his everything. He started to spend more time with his new friends, wealthy, flashy men who flaunted their money and success. James, once humble and hopeful, now acted like he was above everyone, including Emily. Then came the moment that shattered her belief in him entirely. One evening, she tried calling him, but he didn't pick up. She tried again. Nothing. Finally, after hours of silence, he texted, "I'm busy. Talk later." Busy? Emily thought. Since when did James become too busy for me? It was clear now. The man she had loved, the man she had helped build his life, had moved on, and in the process, he had forgotten the person who had stood by him through thick and thin. The final blow came one day when she found out that James had not only moved on emotionally but had also moved on physically. He had begun a relationship with someone else. Someone who fit the new life he had created. The revelation came from Kate, who stormed into Emily's shop one afternoon, her face filled with disbelief. "Emily, I saw James with her," Kate said, shaking her head. She's beautiful, sophisticated, and wealthy. He's acting like he's too good for you now. Emily felt her world collapse around her. She had always believed that when James made it, he would remember her, that he would return the love she had given him. But now, she saw the truth. James had only used her as a stepping stone to get ahead. Once he reached the top, he had no need for her anymore. The next time she confronted him, she could barely recognize him. He was sitting in his new, expensive car, a smug grin on his face. "What is it now, Emily?" he asked, as if he had the right to be annoyed with her for simply seeking answers. "James, you've changed," she said, her voice trembling. "This isn't the man I believed in." He shrugged, a look of indifference on his face. "Times change, Emily, so do people." Her heart broke as she walked away. The man she had invested so much into, the man she had believed in, was now nothing more than a stranger to her. As the days passed, Emily's heart began to heal. She poured herself into her work, determined not to let the betrayal define her. The pain of James's rejection, though deep, became the driving force behind her transformation. She expanded her small tailoring shop, invested in herself, and started taking online business management courses. Each stitch she sewed felt like a stitch of strength, building the foundation of a future she could be proud of. She knew that life wasn't about waiting for someone to make her dreams come true. It was about building them herself. 3 years later, Emily was no longer the same woman who had once given everything for someone else. She was now the proud owner of one of the biggest fashion houses in Brooklyn. Her designs graced the runways, and her name was known far and wide. She had a team of over 100 people working under her, and her business was thriving. Emily had become a woman of strength, independence, and success, everything James had once promised her. But she had moved on. She had no interest in revenge, no desire to watch him fail. She had won in the best way possible, by building herself into a woman he could never have again. She had found peace, and for the first time in her life, she knew what it meant to truly love and appreciate herself. One day, while at a business meeting, Emily ran into James. He was now working as a security guard, a far cry from the man who had once dreamed of wealth and success. His face was filled with regret, and he tried to apologize. But Emily just smiled softly and walked past him. "Life has already dealt with you," she whispered to herself as she entered the building of her empire. And as she continued to build her future, Emily knew one thing for sure: her story was just beginning. Don't forget to subscribe to the Life Stories channel for more inspiring tales.